My name is Arily.
Could you just share with us a little bit about your childhood?
So my childhood was pretty chaotic growing up. My dad was a Marine, so we moved around quite a lot. I had three younger brothers, so pretty much from age 3 onwards, I had to act like an adult. And with my dad being gone so much, I had to pick up a lot of the slack around the household and kind of help look after my brothers. And moving around so much, I wasn't able to make stable friendships that often. But I did very well in school. I was very focused, very driven, and I always wanted to be a singer. So here I am.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think you just said it, but what were your dreams as a kid?
As a kid, my dreams were to be like a pop star. I was really into like Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, and I wanted to be like them when I grew up. um, yeah, I think every kid when they're young they want to be like a whole cocktail of things. Like I'm sure I wanted to be like a model, actress, singer, fashion designer, author, 3-time Grammy winner, or something like that, something crazy like that.
Nice. If you don't mind, could you share with us just more about your general relationship with your dad and then how that relationship felt to you?
My relationship with my dad is interesting. He has pretty bad PTSD from when he was deployed last. He was injured twice in Iraq the last time he was deployed, and he was very, very goofy, and I was definitely a daddy's girl when I was a lot younger. But after he came back from Iraq that last time he was deployed, he was a completely different person. So there's a little bit of strain there, there's a little bit of trauma there. It's gotten a lot better over the years as he's healed some, but it's not as cordial or as warm as it used to be for sure.
How did that feel growing up?
It was my first betrayal almost. I really looked up to my dad, and he, like I said, he was a totally different person when he came back from Iraq, and it kind of shook me to my core. It was very traumatizing for me, and it was sad, and I still get kind of sad when I think about it now, even though years and years and years have passed since then. That things aren't the same, and they probably never will be the same because of what has happened throughout that time.
How do you work through that?
I just kind of remind myself that like myself and like every other human being, my dad is mostly just a product of the things that have happened to him, and he has definitely been through a lot. Being a staff sergeant in the Marines is not an easy feat, and being deployed for 6 months at a time during wartime is no easy feat. And I can't even fathom the things that he's been through because I've never brought myself to ask. And frankly, I don't really want him to think about that. So I just kind of rationalize it by telling myself that he's been through some things that I probably wouldn't understand, and that it's affected him deeply, and maybe he might be in a little bit of denial about it.
Would you mind sharing that contrast? Because you mentioned when he came back from Iraq, like you noticed something almost completely different. Can you describe like a little bit before and then the after?
Yeah, so my last memory of my dad before he went to Iraq the last time was I was inside the house. I don't remember exactly what I was doing, but I remember that he was outside with my three brothers, and they were just goofing off on the trampoline. And I just remember like him being this like goofy, really funny guy. And when he came back, it was like that person was completely gone, and he had been replaced with almost an imposter. Like kind of like the Paul is dead conspiracy. Like he had died in Iraq, and he came back and was replaced with a stand-in that wasn't at all like my father. He was very like grim, very dark, very paranoid, very cynical, very nihilistic. And yeah, it was just such a stark contrast that I had a hard time. I was 10 years old at the time. I had a very hard time rationalizing it or understanding what was going on.
Did that change stick with him throughout? Like,
Yeah, in a lot of ways, yeah, he still is kind of paranoid. He's still kind of wary of certain things. He's not as irritable as he was when he first came back, and he's not as snappy. He doesn't snap as often, but he definitely is. He still has a little bit of that person inside of him. He's slowly come back over the years. He's still kind of goofy, but you know, his PTSD paired with like snowballing health issues has made things a little bit different, and they probably won't be the same.
What about your relationship with your mom?
My relationship with my mom is kind of tricky. It definitely, like every teenage girl, like mothers and daughters are kind of enemies for a while. And, my relationship with my mom is very complicated, I think, because she has her own trauma as well. And she tries very hard not to project that trauma onto me, but sometimes she does fall short on that. And especially growing up, I kind of felt a little bit of a strain because I felt like I was constantly trying to live up to her expectations and simultaneously constantly failing to meet those expectations. So I tell my mother now that, everything that I do, I hope to make her proud because that's all I've ever wanted in my life was to make her proud. But, at the same time, I am my own person and I have to go my own direction.
When you say she's had trauma of your own, what do you mean by that?
So she definitely has, or she had a very strained relationship with her mother, my grandmother. She passed away when I was 6, but there was a lot of tension in that relationship and a lot of resentment. And I feel like it kind of set the tone for our relationship growing up because in her trying so hard, like not to be like her mother, sometimes she put a little too much pressure on herself. And it definitely showed up in certain ways.
How did it show up?
She definitely might have been a little bit harsher on me than she was on any of my brothers. Because I think there was that expectation of like trying to, inadvertently mend the relationship between her and her mother kind of vicariously through me, if that makes any sense. And, just wanting better for me and better for my life than she had with hers, but kind of maybe not communicating that in the best way.
How do you balance that, I guess, that desire that you just said to make your mom proud, but to also make yourself proud and do your own thing?
I mean, the do kind of they do both kind of they're kind of one. They kind of complement each other because, the things that make me happy and the things that make me proud are the things that make my mother proud. So, me pursuing my music, me going after my dreams is something that makes her proud because as she's had time to distance herself from her mother and her relationship with her mother, she's been able to open her mind to the idea that I might not want exactly the life that she has or exactly the life that she had, or I might not want the life that she wanted for me when I was much younger. And yeah, just, yeah.
What's the biggest things you learned from both your parents?
I definitely learned that you are not your trauma. A lot of people, I mean, every human being has trauma in their lives, and a lot of what we assume are our personality traits are really just trauma responses. And what I have learned from my parents is that you are not necessarily those things that you taught yourself in order to survive when you were growing up. You are a number of different things. You're like, people are complicated organisms. They're not the product of their trauma. They're not the responses they had to that trauma. And it was kind of hard as a child to understand that. But now that I'm an adult and I have my own problems and I have my own baggage, I kind of understand that more.
Could you tell us about your first love and how that felt? It's whatever you associate as your first love. So it can be a hobby, it can be a person, it can be, whatever.
Yeah. My first love was actually my cat. Her name is Lil. um, she passed away when I was 19. She held on until I came home from college one weekend, and that was it. And yeah, she was very very sassy, very interesting cat. but she loved me unconditionally and I loved her unconditionally. It sounds kind of weird, but I got her when I was 5. So I got her when I was 5, and at the time we lived in Massachusetts. I didn't really have any friends. There was some animosity in the neighborhood between my parents and the other parents that lived there. And the other parents that lived there were like actively encouraging their kids to bully me and my brothers. So we didn't really have very many friends. So my parents got us 2 kittens, Phil and Lil was my cat. When we picked them up, we got them from somebody who was just giving away kittens for free. When we picked them up, we put them in like a cardboard box and drove them home. And Lil actually broke out of her box on the drive home and climbed into my lap. And that was like the first time that I felt like love for another creature. I mean, of course, you love your parents when you're a kid, but you don't really, it's more of like a survivalist thing, I think, versus like, with a pet. It's like, you're cute. I love you. So.
Nice. Could you tell us about your first loss or heartbreak? Same thing, whatever you associate with those words and how that felt.
So my first heartbreak was actually in 4th grade, I want to say. Yeah, it was 4th grade because it was just before I moved out of North Carolina. I had this huge crush on this kid in my class. And I thought he had a crush on me too, but he ended up like being boyfriend and girlfriend with another girl. And I remember I cried so much. And looking back on it now, it's just like the stupidest thing. But I wrote so many songs about it, and I was pretty angsty about it for a while. And I remember him just being like saying something like, be careful, and me being like, oh, what do you care? Like I'm in a movie or something. But yeah, that was my first heartbreak. Pretty young, I feel like, to be experiencing that.
Who would you say first taught you what love is and how?
So this is another kind of cheesy answer, but I think that my fiance, who I live with right across the street, he taught me. He and I both taught each other what real love is. We both had kind of a rough dating life, and I think that when we met each other, we kind of needed each other to learn how to function in a healthy relationship and how to trust other people, because we definitely both had pretty bad relationship anxiety, pretty bad trust issues, but that kind of mutual understanding of like, okay, like I have a hard time trusting people. It's kind of forced us to be good at communicating. It's forced us to be good at resolving problems. And of course we've had our fair share of problems like everybody does, but it's taught us how to handle those in a healthy manner rather than just like exploding and throwing things and crying. Yeah, it's the first healthy relationship that I've had, and it's taught me a lot, and it's a lot of hard work, but it's definitely rewarding.
Can you describe that hard work, right? I think a lot of us, when we think of love and relationships, naturally we're like, oh well, we don't equate the word work to it, right? Like we just
Yeah.
yeah. So how, for instance, what does that work actually look like?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like you said, like when we talk about things like falling in love, it sounds like kind of a passive thing, but in reality it's not. It's a choice that you make every single day. I mean, people who have been together for 50 years or more will tell you the same thing that I'm saying now. It's a lot of hard work because it does involve a lot of emotional labor, and it's a lot of like, I'm feeling hurt, I'm kind of mad right now, but you get to a point where you have to either quit or you decide to keep moving forward. And in a committed relationship, you decide continuously to keep moving forward, no matter how much it hurts, within reason, of course. If it's a healthy relationship, if it's a toxic relationship, absolutely get out. But but when you're mad at each other, when you're upset at each other, when you hurt each other, you decide to work through that pain, and it's not easy to do, but it's something that you have to do if you want to be happy.
Can you tell us about one, to like say a hard moment in having to work it out, or in somewhere in your history, for example, like when you did this and you had to work through your feelings and then convey your feelings in words, even when you didn't maybe necessarily want to.
Like, yeah, do you mean like tell you a time
Yeah,
when that
yeah,
happened?
that'd be good.
Yeah, actually, that happened just recently. So, um, I tend to withdraw when I feel kind of anxious or kind of sad about certain things. And for me, it was just a lot of little things that were kind of piling up one after the other. And I finally sat down and I was like, can I talk to you? And of course, like when you hear that, like you freak out. And, my fiance Andrew, he goes, yeah, what's up? And I just like tell him like everything that's on my mind. And like, I don't like talking about my problems. I don't like feeling like I'm burdening people with my emotions. But I have learned throughout the course of our relationship that you do have to reach out and ask for help sometimes. You can't battle everything on your own, and that's especially the case in an intimate relationship. You have to talk to the other person. And he struggles with that sometimes too. But yeah, I think it was Thursday or Friday night last week. I was like, "Can I talk to you?" And yeah, we just talked about everything, and he was like, I'm sorry I made you feel that way. Thank you for talking to me, and I said thank you for listening. And it seems so hard going in because you're just kind of overthinking it. But afterwards, you feel great. It's like a good cry or a good workout.
So for you specifically, what's love to you? Has it always been the same? If not, how does it compare to maybe what love was in your youth to what it is now?
I think it's definitely different. Growing up, I grew up watching like Disney movies and stuff. And like I said, love seems to be like kind of a passive thing in, especially like the cinematic culture. But over time, I've grown to realize that, like I said earlier, it is in fact a choice, but it's not, sometimes you might not exactly like the person. You can love each other, but not always like each other. Sometimes you're just going to get on each other's nerves. And that doesn't mean that you love the person any less. And this is something that I definitely struggled with a lot in my youth is separating like my emotions that I'm feeling all the time from like my emotions that I feel like in general. Like in general, I love this person, but right now I'm kind of mad at them. So I don't really feel that love in the moment. So when I was much younger, I would feel like I didn't love that person in that moment. It's a psychological phenomenon called splitting, where when you feel like a negative emotion, everything is negative. I definitely suffered from that a lot. And as I've gotten older, I've learned how to separate the good from the bad and kind of accept that a lot of things are kind of in the gray area. It's not all good, it's not all bad, it's not happy, sad, love, hate. Sometimes it's a little bit of everything in the middle.
What's a good day look like for you?
A good day for me is if I wake up on time, get out of bed on time, do my yoga, get ready, leave the house on time, get all my work done for the day. There's no traffic when I'm coming home. That rarely happens. Um, you know, all jokes aside, a good day for me is when I feel like I've done a lot, when I feel productive, when I feel good about the work that I've done, and when I feel motivated to do more, to get more things off my list, and to keep working, keep going towards my dreams, keep even doing the boring work, because that intrinsic motivation to get things done.
What about a bad day?
Whew, a bad day is it could be a lot of things. A bad day could be when I'm too sad or too anxious to eat. It could be when I'm too stressed to get out of bed. It could be when I don't get any of my work done because I can't seem to focus on one task at a time. All sorts of things like that.
How do you get through those days?
I just kind of tell myself to take things one step at a time, even if I just get the small stuff out of the way, even if I just knock one thing off my to do list or something that I've been putting off forever, or even if I just take a day to just like listen to what my body needs. Like maybe I need some extra rest, maybe I need to just relax, maybe I need to stop, find some ways to cope with stressing. Because that's usually what the root cause of the bad days is like I'm stressed about something. So even if I just take a minute to listen to myself and listen to what I really need, it helps me turn my day around if it's a bad day.
What's a person or an event that's shaped you good or bad? How does it feel when you reflect on
Ooh, there's a lot of those.
that? Two of them.
So An event that shaped me, I feel like most millennials would agree with me when I say this, is September 11th, 2001. For me, it was very different because I remember very clearly my parents pulled me out of kindergarten that day. It was my sixth birthday, actually. And I didn't know what was going on at the time. My parents wanted to make sure I didn't know because they didn't want to like ruin the day for me. But shortly after, my dad reenlisted in the Marines because he was in the reserves. We were living in Foxborough, Massachusetts at the time, and he was in the reserves. My mom was going to college, and he reenlisted after that because he had a feeling that we were going to go back to war. And that was kind of like the turning point for my entire family, actually, not just my dad and not just myself, but my entire immediate family, and probably a lot of people as well. And then a person that changed me, I don't know, there's been so many.
How old were you when I guess I remember being a millennial myself.
Yeah.
Top end millennial. uh, I remember sitting in class. I think I was in 11th grade, looking at the TV,
Hmm.
seeing the Twin Towers burning. Right.
Yeah.
Um, it's obviously something I'll never forget.
Hmm.
Because then there's the domino effect. My brother then enlisted. He went to war, lost his legs, and
Oh
went
boy.
that route. My sister enlisted too. She's in the military. They're both in Marines.
Hmm.
Um, what did? How old were you?
I was 6. It was my sixth birthday.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when you saw that, right, or the imagery, or any of the imagery, and then with your dad going to war, and then as a kid, at 6 years old, if you can remember, even in general, what
Hmm.
it felt like for you.
It felt like the world stopped, and in a way it did. Like everybody just stopped what they were doing to see what was happening. And then there was a little bit of fear. Even at 6 years old, I could comprehend that what was happening wasn't normal, that what was happening was incredibly violent and incredibly terrifying for a lot of people. And, um, looking back on it now, like I said, it was a turning point for our family. There's the uncertainty of like my father could go to war and not come back, or he could come back and be a shell of who he used to be. He could come back and be amputated, handicapped, what have you. There's that fear, that uncertainty of where do we go from here after such a catastrophic, cataclysmic event, you know? So,
Even when you were young and your dad redeployed, did you kind of feel the seriousness of him being gone, or?
I definitely did more so than my brothers. My brothers were definitely a little more emotional with my father's departure. I think they cried a lot more and they felt his absence a lot more. For me, it was more of like, I don't know what could happen to him overseas. And he was, in fact, injured twice. Um, for the most part, he's intact, despite his numerous health issues since then. But I definitely felt the seriousness because it was very much, it was just me and my mom. And I was 9 or 10 years old the last time he deployed, and kind of feeling like I had to be a little bit more grown up than a 9 year old typically is. I had to be a little bit more mature. I had to kind of hold the family together because my brothers were a wreck and my mom was kind of a wreck. And so I had to be like the glue there.
What about? Do you have anything else that would what you would say shaped you, good or bad?
Probably, moving around so much definitely shaped me as well. I had a lot of, exposure to different backgrounds, different kinds of people, rich, poor, people who have lived in the same area for decades, people who just moved there. And so it's taught me to be very accommodating of people because you never know what their life is like until you get to know them. And, it's taught me to be really open minded because, I would say when I was like 15 and we moved to Florida, I was over the whole moving thing and I was kind of closed minded by then. But as a kid, it was like, okay, cool. I get to make all these new friends. I get to meet all these new people. And like, it didn't matter to me what kind of person they were as long as they were good people. And, I don't really question people for who they are or what they believe in. I'm just kind of like, that's cool. So it was definitely a positive that came out of being a military brat.
What inspires you?
What inspires me is, seeing people who are where I want to be eventually. Seeing that pop star who's like selling out Mission Ballroom on like a Wednesday night. That motivates me to keep working because I know at some point they were in my shoes. They were just starting out. They were brand new, just stepping onto the scene for the first time, and they had to climb up the ladder very slowly or rapidly even, and they had to work their way into that position. So that kind of inspires me because everybody starts from nothing, and only very few people become something, but there's a lot of work involved in getting that point. So that inspires me and motivates me a lot, especially when I get kind of frustrated or I feel like things are kind of stagnant. I just kind of remind myself that there's more steps in the process. Like this isn't the end here. This isn't the landing of the stairway. There's more steps to take before I get to the top.
How do you find that daily inspiration? What's your personal process in pursuing your dream?
So my personal process is, I mean, it's a mix of different things. I people that I admire, I follow them on social media. I listen to their stuff on streaming services. I read about their background. Like I'm the creepy person that looks up every celebrity on Wikipedia, and I know like their astrological signs and stuff because it's fascinating, but it's also validating to see how much work is involved in them getting to the point where they're at now. They've spent decades, honing in on their craft. And for somebody like me who's just starting out, it's nice to know that if you keep putting in that work, eventually you're going to get somewhere. You might not get to where exactly you want to be. You might not be selling out the Hollywood Bowl, but maybe you'll sell out a small local show, and that's pretty fun too. That's pretty cool. So it's just a mix of different things, really. Just a mix of different people that I look up to, different avenues.
I'm a dreamer myself.
Hmm.
There's a lot of hard work involved, right, in pursuing a dream.
Yeah.
No, it's not there per se.
Hmm.
So you're trying to create it as you go. Um, the most important part for me that I have found is that if I don't find the joy in the work, there's no way I can do it.
Exactly.
You
That
know,
is.
you like I'm quite sure you love what you do because you
Hmm.
wouldn't pursue it because the odds are so extravagant, right?
Right.
But they're
Exactly.
against you the moment you're born, is how I see it. As soon as you're
Yeah.
born, you can run the numbers either way. So I
It's
say the
true.
numbers are so against you, that means, hey, a better chance, right?
Yeah.
Like you're against them to begin with. But like the key component, I think, is, loving the word.
Yeah. I mean, that definitely, and I go through periods where I'm like, ugh, I hate music, I want to quit.
Yeah.
And that's usually just because I'm feeling frustrated with any kind of stagnation. And it could literally be anything from like, I sent out like 10 booking emails yesterday. Why haven't I heard back? Like, it could be that, or it could be like bigger things. But yeah, at the end of the day, like, this is something that has gotten me through everything. It's the one constant that has existed in my life is music, and it's something that I've always enjoyed doing. I've always wanted to do it. And, I take pride in it and I enjoy it. It's a lot of fun. And, when it stops being fun is kind of when I take a break from it.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like everything else, like, you need to take a break sometimes. You need to reset, relax, unwind. But yeah, I completely agree that having an enjoyment in what you do is definitely like the key to being successful with it. And success is different for everyone.
Yeah.
But when you enjoy what you do,
Yeah.
that is true success.
Yeah. Can you tell us about a humbling experience for you?
A humbling experience. So Ooh, there's a lot of those. Ooh, how many things have knocked me off of my feet, knocked my ego down to the ground? I would say, so when I was auditioning for colleges, I really wanted to get into music performance. And now that I'm out of college and have been for a while, I am glad that I didn't pursue a performance degree. And my top choice school, which was Florida State, I wanted to go in state, and Florida State was one of the top schools at the time. I had auditioned for the performance program. I got into the music school, but not the performance program. And I remember feeling kind of bummed about that, a little disappointed. And I gave it some thought, and I was like, maybe I don't actually want to perform. Maybe I want to be a teacher. Maybe I want to be a composer. Maybe I want to do music therapy. So I saw that as an opportunity to take a step back from the craziness and kind of really think about exactly what I wanted to do. And it ended up working out in my favor because I took some performance classes. I was in a couple of operas, and I took some teaching classes. I took some music theory, film scoring, stuff like that. And I kind of got to explore my interests a little bit more. And I felt a little bit more well-rounded when I graduated versus if I had just gotten that performance degree that I originally really wanted so badly. I probably would have only just known how to stand on a stage and sing. And I feel like with a performance degree, there's a limited number of things that you can do anyway. It's like you can perform or you can get your teaching certification. And of course, not everybody ends up in one of those two. I ended up working in a corporate job anyway. So that was another humbling thing. Was like looking up music jobs and being like, oh, there's like nothing. That was probably the most humbling thing ever. Was being like, oh, right. So
How'd you was it humbling, or is that like damn, like a realization, like reality?
it was a little bit of both. Cause like some of the other schools that I auditioned for, like they gave me like talent scholarships, and like my ego was like riding on a high right until I got that like letter. And I remember like going to my mom being like, I'm confused, what happened? She's like, it sounds like you got into the music program, but not the music performance program. And I was like, oh, okay. So yeah, I was a little bit of both.
So for this next question, you could answer it any way you want. But if you could go in your mind and think, this life event can be mental, physical, or spiritual. Can you tell us about a time in your life that you can relate with the word war?
Whew. So I was in an emotionally abusive relationship for 3 years. Uh, One of the motivations to get out to Denver for me was one, getting the heck out of Florida, and two, getting the heck away from my boyfriend at the time. And he ended up following me out here. We lived together for a total of 3 months before I finally put my foot down and said that I'd had enough. But that 3 months felt like war because it was constant gaslighting. It was, telling me how to feel. It was a little bit of financial manipulation too, because it was like, telling me to work 7 days a week so that I could pay the rent or, keep up with my half of the rent and stuff like that. And the pressure to stay in that relationship, knowing that I was miserable and I wanted to get out, the only reason why I stayed was because I was afraid that I couldn't afford to live by myself. And when I finally did get out of that relationship and I lived by myself, that was also its own kind of war, because I was coping with the trauma of having been abused for 3 years and not knowing if I can afford to live by myself, and still trying to navigate this brand new city where I had no friends, I had no relatives, I had nobody to lean on but myself. It was terrifying. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to go through. But every day it got a little bit easier. I fell a little bit more in love with the city. I made more friends. I got a little bit better at managing my finances, and eventually I moved to a cheaper place, and eventually I got a roommate and things like that. But it was hard. There were a lot of nights where I wasn't sure if I was going to make it out alive because I was choosing between paying my rent and paying my utilities and eating food. And it was terrifying, I gotta say.
So 3 years abusive relationship. Within that time frame of that relationship, when did the abuse start?
Well, it never starts immediately. It started, it was very subtle at first, like subtle jabs at like my appearance, like telling me, like I remember him laughing at me when I took my shirt off and just feeling embarrassed. And it escalated to calling me names. It escalated to saying some pretty awful, hurtful things. And it never got to the point where I was being hit, but it was physical at times. Like I would try to distance myself from an argument and he would grab my arm really hard, leave a bruise on it. Things like that. It's always like a slow burn because if somebody starts it, like they hit the gas immediately, no one's going to stick with that. But it's very slow. It's very manipulative. And I would say that it probably started before the relationship even began, because there's in every abusive relationship there's a stage called love bombing where the abuser is just pulling out all the stops, pouring all of the affection onto you, and you're like, wow, this person is amazing. And that was where I would argue where it started, was before we had even officially entered a relationship, with the love bombing and kind of the sappy, like, I'm such a nice guy stuff, like kind of making me pity him and making me think that he was a nicer person than he actually was. And then as soon as we officially entered a relationship was when the abuse kind of started trickling in little by little. Like I said, it started with little tiny jabs and eventually it escalated to breaking down my appearance. The last straw for me was when I had mentioned wanting to pursue a certain career path and he scoffed at me. And I was like, wow, thank you so much for all of your support. Like, but it gradually escalated to that point. And I remember like one of the last things he had ever said to me was, if you got out of your own head so much, or if you stopped being in your own head so much, maybe you would actually be happy with me for once. And that was kind of when like the spell kind of broke, right? Was like, what are you talking about? Like, you are actively being disrespectful to me. That's why I'm unhappy, not because I'm in my own head, because you are being disrespectful. You're not being a good partner, so.
How'd you cope with that within the relationship? And I mean, when I say within, I don't mean like with your partner. I just mean like, how'd you cope with that during the relationship?
During the relationship, I mean, it was hard because, relationships like that are very isolating. I remember very specifically, there was one friend of mine that he did not like because she was always pointing out the abusive things he was doing. She was like, hey, that's not normal. Like, he's not supposed to be talking to you like that. And I just kind of brushed it off like, yeah, well, I made him mad. And what happens a lot with people who are in those kinds of relationships is they kind of tend to isolate themselves and they kind of move away from their friends and they get sucked more and more into the toxicity of that relationship. And something that kind of helped me cope was kind of being rebellious. I still went out with some of my sorority sisters. I would still go out with my friends. I would still talk to people, talk to my friends, although not as much as I used to, and I wasn't as vulnerable as I probably should have been about what I was going through. And I definitely wrote a lot of songs too when I was in that relationship. A few of them are on the first album, some of them are on the second, a few might be on the third. But I did turn into music a lot because I was studying music while I was in that relationship. So I was able to kind of use a little more of the skills that I was learning to write more. Every once in a while, I just take a break after class, go to a practice room, fiddle around on piano, write something, and it would help me feel a little bit better.
When you got out of it, would you say you felt like huge relief, even though it was terrifying? There was like the relief and
Yeah.
the terror of just, but the terror was better than
Yeah.
what that was.
I just remember like calling my mom and like telling my friends, and they all said they were proud of me. I felt a huge wave of relief, you know, and a huge, a lot of terror, because it's that uncertainty of like, can I afford to do this? Can I make it on my own? And a little bit of pride too, for sticking up for myself. That's not something that I did a lot when I was a lot younger. I was definitely the kind that just I was very passive and like I wouldn't say anything. Eventually, I would get driven to a point where I would explode. Everybody does. But for the most part, I'd be very passive. I'd just sink into my chair, put my headphones on, blast my music, ignore everybody. That was the kind of person I was. But for me to finally put my foot down after 3 years of manipulation and abuse was a huge step for me. And I remember my mom saying, "I'm proud of you," and me being like, "Yeah, me too." And I felt so free too. It was like, I'm not tethered to somebody anymore. I can go out to a freaking coffee shop and spend the entire day there if I want to. I can go out with my friends on a weeknight if I really want to. I can record an album. I can go to Paris, which I did. I took myself to Paris. I did kind of the eat, pray, love type of deal where just to prove to myself that I didn't need another person with me in order to be happy. And it was one of the best times of my life. It was hard. It was war, but it was also, in a way, its own peace.
So the next question is the same type of question. Go in your mind and think. This life event can be mental, physical, or spiritual. Can you tell us about a time that you can relate to the word peace?
The word peace. I would say probably around the time, it was January of this year where I put out my first album. That to me was, I wouldn't say it was like explicitly peaceful, but for me it was like all of these tumultuous events in my life were leading up to that point. And it felt kind of like a resolution to me. Like everything kind of fell into place at that point. It was something that I didn't think that I could do, and I just did it just to see if I could. And it was on CPR. I was not expecting that at all. And it was just, there's so much of myself was put in that album to see that people were genuinely interested in it. That was like, like it's kind of like when you're freaking out about a test and you take it and you're like, I'm not sure if I pass, and then you pass it with flying colors. That is what it felt like to me, was all of these tumultuous events that have shaped me as a person, and in turn all of the parts of myself that I've put into this album that were influenced by those events, being able to just get it out into the world, get it out of my system, and have people like actually listen to it was, it was very peaceful in its own way for me.
Yeah. Can you tell us about a truly difficult time in your life and how that felt? And if you already brushed on it, I guess we can talk more about it, but it's whatever you see as like one of the hardest times in your life.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely living alone, it was my first time as an adult living this far away from my family. My first job out of college, my first, real life outside of being a student. And there's a lot of difficulty. I feel like every post-grad experiences it. There's a lot of difficulty navigating post-grad life, where from age probably 5, maybe even earlier, until age 22, maybe even later, you're a student. That's your identity. That's your job. But when you finally graduate, it's like, okay, great. So what do I do now?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, coming out to Denver, having that change of scenery, but not really having a support system to lean on. Like, I had to make my own support system. And a lot of the time, I was my own support system. That was incredibly difficult, because it's like, not only do I got to put up with my own crap, I got to support myself through it. And, I'm there to celebrate my own victories, but I'm also there for all of my own losses. And it's very difficult. Like I said, navigating a whole new city, a whole new identity outside of school, outside of where you've grown up, away from your family, nobody around there that you can lean on. It was very difficult, but it has taught me so much about being resilient. And I like to think that's what I came out here for, was forging a path for myself, whatever it looks like, and making the best life that I possibly can for myself.
How did you, excuse me, how did you support yourself, like in abstract ways?
Uh, I mean, I would just take myself out to explore the city. For the longest time, I was just like, I don't even know who I am. So a big part of that, like me supporting myself, was just self-exploration. What do I like to listen to? What do I like to eat? Where do I like to go? What do I like to wear? Things like that. I mean, the major part of it was getting a stable job. That was probably the key. I mean, I'm going to tell anybody that's the key to anything, is like, make sure you are at least making enough to cover your bills. And I wasn't, but that's not relevant. I mean, it is, but yeah, it was just, making sure that I had enough money to pay my rent, at the very least, pay my rent and pay for my car, because, everything else I could kind of figure out as I went. Figuring out my hobbies, finding some friends, things like that. Things that you always do when you move to a new town. But for me, it was a much slower process because I was, getting on my feet here. It was definitely an interesting time for sure.
Can you tell us about a truly joyous moment in your life and how that felt?
um, so I want to say around, yeah, it had to have been January this year. I remember like I put my first single out and I was just like sending it out to like everywhere that I could. And I remember it was like a Monday or a Tuesday morning. Um, Andrew had just woken up. He was getting ready for the day. I was just kind of chilling, and I checked my email and I saw that CPR wanted to talk to me about my album, and I screamed. I was like so floored by by that fact, and my dog like looked at me like, "Are you okay?" And Andrew came out. He was like, "What happened?" And I was like, CPR wants to talk to me about my album. He thought I was getting like murdered or something. But that was probably one of the most joyous moments in my life, because it was just one of those things that I just did just for the hell of it, right? And I didn't expect anything out of it. So to kind of shout into the void and have the void shout back at me was pretty awesome.
And do you find those things or stuff like that, like it nudges you and to keep going?
Yeah, it absolutely does, because, every artist experiences this, where, we're kind of our own worst enemies, we're our own worst critics. And I tend to get very in my own head. I am the worst critic of all. And, it's very easy for me to get in my own head and be like, nobody cares about this. Like, because I put so much of myself into it that I kind of project myself onto it. And I am just kind of like, nobody wants to listen to this. Why would anybody care? So those kinds of things I find to be very validating, even if it's, a brand new podcast or anything. Anybody who wants to talk about my stuff is like, I love that, because it's like people, find me interesting enough to want to talk about me or want to talk to me. I find those very validating, because it's very much, breaking out of that cloud of self-doubt.
What keeps you up at night?
Stress. that I actually went through a period of like 2 or 3 weeks where Sunday nights I could not sleep a wink. I took a melatonin, I had my little sleep mask on, I had a white noise machine, the little humidifier, could not sleep for the life of me. Um, that's the short answer is stress. But the long answer is, stress about, am I doing good at my job? Am I doing the right thing by trying to pursue music, even if it's just as a side project? Like, am I being a good friend? Am I a good person? Existential things like that too.
How do you work through those things when you're at night? Because I have the same problem.
Some nights I don't. As you can see, like I lose sleep sometimes. I try my best not to. Um, but I just tell myself, take things one step at a time. That is like always been my little motto whenever I'm stressed about anything is like just take a breath and then okay, what step can I take towards solving this problem, even if it's not immediate. Um, yeah, aside from that, I can't help you there.
Right. What keeps you going every day?
What keeps me going every day is, I mean, everybody's answer for this one is probably the same as my dreams. It's that motivation of like, if I stop now, this is where I stay. But if I keep going, where will I end up? That's what keeps me going every day is wanting to find out who I'll be 5, 10 years from now.
Does that require faith, hope, or any of those things?
A lot of it. I tell everybody that is even remotely entrepreneurial that miracles happen when you have unwavering faith and relentless effort. That is like the two things that make miracles. It's like when you believe in yourself wholeheartedly and when you work nonstop. And yeah, it is nonstop. And it's exhausting. And sometimes you do need to just take a step back from it, take a breather, take a self care day, whatever you got to do. But it is constant work. And yeah, a lot of faith, a lot of hope.
So the next question, imagine you're in the hospital today with only hours to live. What would be your regrets, if any?
So this is a weirdly specific regret. I'm kind of taking care of it now a little bit. So when I went to college, I got a BA in music, and the BA program at Florida State is very conducive to getting a second degree. An upperclassman told me when I was a freshman that I should really consider getting a second degree. And I was like, nah, that sounds like way too much work. Now I wish I would have gone for it and gotten like a communications degree. Right now I'm in grad school to get a master's degree in communication management. So it kind of is working itself out, but I wish I would have done it sooner.
So you're alive and well. You feel that you can change or, be at peace with that regret.
So yeah, that it's like okay, all right, I guess I'll finish my master's degree now. Yeah.
You told us what your dreams were as a kid. I think we know what they may be, but what are your dreams now?
So, I'd love to get to a point where I'm making a decent income off of my music. I'm able to go on tours, even if it's just within the United States, playing with some of my idols, being on gigs with some of my idols. That would be awesome. If I could go platinum, that'd be sick. But I mean, shoot for the stars, I guess. But my goals are a lot more humble now than they were when I was a kid because, when you're an adult, you're more shaped by reality than, kid, the sky's the limit, but, you're an adult, you can only jump like 2 feet high. So, yeah, but I guess, my dreams are the same. I think they're just a little more specific now. Now that I know a little bit more, not just about the world, but about the music industry.
You're the co-author of your life story. What's your picture perfect ending? And by that I don't mean the end. I just mean like, here's the movie.
Yeah.
This is
when I'm doing that, I hope to be like, middle-aged. If I'm not retired, getting ready to, have some, kids who look up to me and think that I was a good mother. husband that thinks I was a good wife, um, career colleagues that think that I was an inspiration to them. More than anything, I hope to be an inspiration to people to live their lives the way that they want to, whether it's quitting their crappy job and starting their own business, or leaving their crappy relationship and finding a better one, or completely uprooting their lives and moving somewhere they've never been before, away from all of their support system just to see if they can do it. Whatever that looks like for them, I hope that I'm an inspiration for them to do that. And, if I have a Grammy or something on my mantle, that'd be cool too.